You're tuned into Learning UX with dialogue from Mass Designer, and this is the second episode of the UX Cast podcast. Today, we're going to explore something pretty fundamental if you want to build anything people actually love using. We're talking about the history of UX design, and spoiler alert, it goes back way further than you probably think. Understanding this history isn't just like interesting trivia. It's actually a powerful way to grasp why we do things the way we do now, and maybe even design better products today.
That's absolutely right. It's a journey that shows the principles we rely on now aren't just digital age inventions. They're really rooted in these timeless human needs. And seeing how these ideas popped up again and again across different times and technologies, it gives you a really solid foundation. It helps you see the patterns, build more intuitively.
Okay, so thousands of years, really, before computers, where does that even start? Like cave paintings?
Well, maybe not quite cave paintings, but definitely ancient. We can see these echoes of user-centered thinking way, way back. Think about something like Feng Shui. We're talking maybe 4000 BC here. At its core, it's all about creating harmony, right, between people and their physical space. How you arrange things, this idea that less is more to avoid clutter. Well, that sounds a lot like using white space in modern design, doesn't it? The goal was always this effortless, almost delightful interaction with your surroundings.
So the reason my nicely arranged living room feels good is kind of the same reason a simple app feels easy to use. That's actually a really cool connection.
Exactly. And it wasn't just spaces. Think about the ancient Greeks, maybe around 500 BC. They were already applying similar ideas to tools and workspaces, ergonomics, basically. Designing for comfort, for function. Hippocrates even wrote guidelines for how a surgeon's workspace should be set up for, efficiency. And they designed furniture like those curved Klismos chairs, specifically thinking about things like blood circulation if you were sitting for a long time.
Wow. It's pretty amazing how consistent that need is, isn't it? Comfort, efficiency, making things just, work for us. Long before any screens existed.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. It really does feel like we've always wanted things to be intuitive and, comfortable.
We absolutely have. And that thread continues right into the industrial age, although the focus kind of shifted sometimes. Early 20th century, get figures like Frederick W. Taylor and his scientific management. His big thing was optimizing worker productivity, studying tasks, standardizing tools and methods. Now, he got criticized later for maybe being a bit dehumanizing, but he was one of the first to really systematically research that interaction, human plus tool, even if the only goal was speed.
Right. And Henry Ford took that and ran with it on the Model T assembly line, didn't he? All about maximizing output.
He did. But then contrast that with something like the Toyota production system that emerged later around the 1940s. It was quite different from Taylorism, much more human-centered. It prioritized respect for people, actually asking workers for their input on improving things. They had this intense focus on the customer, on continuous improvement, feedback loops. It was efficiency, sure, but built on valuing the person doing the work.
And that human focus really seems to kick into high gear in the 50s with Henry Dreyfuss, his book, Designing for People. That sounds important. He was saying usability and function matter more than just looks. Okay, now we're really getting somewhere interesting. This isn't just about making things pretty.
Absolutely. Dreyfuss talked about this critical idea, the point of friction, that moment when you're using something and you just get stuck or frustrated. If that friction exists, he argued, the design has failed. Simple as that. He even laid out principles for creating delightful experiences, making users feel safe, comfortable, like having an undo button, basically efficient, and even happy, getting that positive emotional response.
That sounds incredibly modern. And speaking of foundations, didn't Bell Labs do something similar back then, like in the 40s or 50s?
They did. They actually hired a psychologist specifically to work on telephone design. They were really focused on the user experience of that touch-tone keypad. And think about it, that basic layout. We still use it today. It just shows how powerful, truly intuitive, human-focused design can be. It lasts.
Which I guess leads us nicely to Dieter Rams, right? And his famous principles from the 70s.
Exactly. Dieter Rams, his 10 principles for good design. They were kind of a reaction against what he saw as overly confusing, fussy products. They became this huge guiding framework, especially in industrial design.
And wow, when you read them, they sound like they were written for app design yesterday. Like, good design is useful.
Yeah.
It has to meet functional, psychological, and aesthetic needs. Usefulness first. That's literally what we try to do, right? Solve user problems. Or good design makes a product understandable. Clarify the structure, make it self-explanatory. That's just user-friendly 101.
Totally. And good design is unobtrusive. Products are tools, right? Not just decoration. Neutral, restrained. Think about the cleanest digital interfaces that kind of get out of your way. And of course, his big one, good design is as little design as possible. That famous phrase, less, but better. That's pretty much the heart of minimalism in digital design today.
It really is. It's funny. You probably have something super sleek and minimalist, totally Rams inspired, sitting right next to like a remote control that looks like someone sneezed buttons onto a piece of plastic.
Yeah. Yeah, that contrast really highlights Dreyfus's point of friction, doesn't it? And Rams wasn't just theory. His work directly influenced Apple. Steve Jobs, Joni Ive, they were big admirers. That iconic click wheel on the first iPods. Believe it or not, the direct inspiration was the circular dial on one of Rams's Braun radios, the T3.
No way. A radio dial inspiring a digital music revolution.
Okay, so we have these amazing foundations from physical design, but then computers arrive on the scene. How do these ideas translate? Well, that's where fields like human factors really came into their own, especially spurred by things like World War II. Think about complex machines like aircraft back then. You had highly trained pilots crashing, not because they weren't skilled, but because the cockpits, the controls, the displays were just badly designed. Confusing. So there was this huge shift in thinking. Instead of trying to train the human to somehow fit the machine, the goal became designing the machine to fit the human, optimizing performance, minimizing errors, especially in critical situations.
And that thinking must have carried right over when computers started becoming more common, like in the 70s and 80s, because early computers were notoriously difficult to use.
Absolutely. This period saw the rise of cognitive ergonomics, which focused specifically on the mental side, how we process information, make decisions, learn when we're interacting with these complex systems. And growing out of that, in the 1980s, you get human-computer interaction, HCI, as its own distinct field. It pulled together computer science, cognitive science, human factors, all with this mission: make software usable, effective, and ideally even desirable for ordinary people, not just the tech experts. Remember, before the 80s, most interaction was typing commands, right? That was a huge barrier. People talked about a software crisis, great software no one could actually use.
NHI research gave us so much we take for granted now. Things like direct manipulation, actually clicking and dragging stuff on a screen, which is pioneered really early on.
Yeah.
And the mouse, Doug Engelbart's invention, a totally different way to interact.
Yep. And the whole idea of windows on a screen, first tiled, then overlapping Engelbart and Alan Kay were key there too. And you absolutely have to mention Xerox PayRark. Their work on the Alto and Star systems. That's where the graphical user interface, the GUI, and that whole desktop idea we still use really took shape.
Oh, the GUI was massive, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That really opened computing up to everyone. The Apple Macintosh in '84 is such a landmark. It took those GUI concepts, paired them with the mouse, and made computers feel intuitive. It went mainstream because it applied these human-centered principles so well.
That's really when the focus shifted from just pure efficiency or function towards making things understandable, usable, even enjoyable for everyday folks.
Okay, so the interface is getting better, more intuitive. But what about understanding how people actually think when they use these things? Because let's face it, we're not always logical creatures.
Exactly, and that's where cognitive psychology becomes absolutely crucial for UX. It helps us understand the inner workings perception, attention, memory, problem solving, and apply that knowledge to design. So, for instance, understanding attention and perception tells us how visual elements, color, shape, contrast, layout, those gestalt principles like grouping things together, how they guide a user's eye and focus. Memory is another big one. Good design has to support our limited working memory. That's why we do things like chunking information into smaller pieces. And the principle of recognition over recall is huge. It's almost always easier for someone to recognize an option in a menu than to recall a specific command they need to type.
Ah, right. So showing me the save button is better than making me remember to type .wq or something obscure.
Precisely. We also look at how people solve problems and make decisions, aiming to streamline those processes and minimize cognitive load, basically, the mental effort needed. Hick's law is a classic example. It states that the more choices you give someone, the longer it takes them to decide. So in UX, we try to limit options, group them logically, maybe offer smart defaults. And of course, language and comprehension. Just using clear, concise labels and text is fundamental. All this stuff works together to manage that cognitive load and stop people getting frustrated.
So cognitive psychology helps with the more rational brain functions. But then behavioral economics comes along and reminds us our decisions are often driven by, well, other things.
It really does. Behavioral economics shines a light on all the mental shortcuts, biases, and emotional factors that sway our choices. Take concepts like framing and anchoring. How you present information dramatically affects perception. Show a really expensive option first, and suddenly the next one down seems like a bargain, right? Defaulting is super powerful too. People tend to stick with pre-selected options. Designing smart defaults can gently guide users towards certain actions. And social proof, we're wired to follow the crowd, showing reviews, testimonials, popular choice badges that taps right into it. Then there's loss aversion. Psychologically, the pain of losing something feels stronger than the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. That's why those "don't miss out" or "your trial is ending" messages can be so motivating. And the endowment effect, we value things more just because we feel we own them. Free trials, allowing customization, that builds a sense of ownership and perceived value. Thinking about all these psychological nudges, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? It actually brings up a question for everyone listening. Have you noticed a website or app using something like social proof, maybe showing 10 other people bought this? Or perhaps using framing to make one option seem better? We'd love to hear what examples you've spotted out there. Let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, definitely share your example. We'd be really interested to read what you've noticed. It's everywhere once you start looking. All right, so we have all these principles from ancient times, industrial design, HDI, psychology. Let's look at how they came together in some really famous products. How did this history actually shape things we all know?
Okay, good idea. Let's start with the iPod. Back in 2001. Now, it wasn't the first MP3 player, not by a long shot, but it completely changed the game by focusing on the customer experience. The existing players, they were often bulky, had terrible user interfaces, short battery life, and getting music onto them was just a nightmare. Apple didn't invent the category, but they were what you might call a fast follower. They looked at all those user pain points and solved them brilliantly. Its success was built on simplicity, on reducing cognitive load. You can really see the influence of Dieter Rams' minimalism there. Steve Jobs famously insisted on getting rid of the physical on-off switch, fewer decisions for the user. The focus was laser sharp. Just listen to your music easily. And that click wheel, inspired by that Braun radio dial, remember? It was iconic because it just worked so well for navigating potentially thousands of songs. Scrolling felt fluid, intuitive. It removed those think points, as Dreyfus might say. Consistency was key. It just felt good to use.
Totally. Okay, what about Google search? Especially the early homepage after 98. Talk about minimal.
Oh, absolutely. Google's homepage is a masterclass in low cognitive load. Just the logo, the search bar, a couple of buttons, that's it. By stripping away everything non-essential, it minimizes the mental effort needed just to figure out the interface. Your focus goes entirely to your search query. It cuts out distractions, encourages focused engagement. Even advanced search options were typically hidden away using progressive disclosure. Only show complexity if the user actually asks for it.
So simple, yet so effective. And then the iPhone in 2007, that felt like a completely different world opening up.
It really was a watershed moment for HCI. Suddenly you had a decent web browser, your music player, and a phone, all integrated onto one device with this amazing capacitive touchscreen. And it introduced multi-touch gestures to the mainstream. The whole design philosophy, clearly influenced by people like Don Norman and Rams, was about clarity, efficiency, aesthetic integrity. Interactions felt natural: swiping, pinching to zoom, tapping. Those multi-touch gestures were revolutionary because they drastically reduced cognitive load. Instead of navigating complex menus with tiny buttons, you were directly manipulating the content on the screen. Studies quickly showed people could do things faster and with way less frustration. The iPhone basically reset everyone's expectations for mobile interaction. It created new mental models. Interactions felt predictable, consistent, especially across the Apple ecosystem later on. Things like making tap targets large enough reduced friction. It influenced pretty much all mobile design that followed, pushing things towards flat design, responsive design. It was a triumph of designing for the human. And understanding this whole journey, this history, it isn't just, an academic exercise. It directly shapes how we approach design right now. Modern practices are deeply rooted in these older ideas.
Absolutely. You see Rams less, but better, everywhere in digital minimalism today, right? Clean layouts, lots of white space, focusing on the core task to cut down cognitive load and frustration. Google search is still a prime example. And Don Norman's principles of user-centered design, they're basically the bedrock of intuitive digital experiences. Thinking about affordances and signifiers, how a button looks like a button and tells you it can be clicked, or reducing those gulfs. He talks about the gulf of execution, making it easy to do the thing, and the gulf of evaluation, making it easy to see what happened. Feedback like progress bars or confirmation messages, that's all straight from Norman. And consistency in UI, making things predictable, pure Norman, essential for learnability.
And this historical context flows directly into current practices like responsive design and the mobile-first approach. Those became necessities with the explosion of different devices, but they're really about adapting those core human-centered principles. Ram's focus on essentials, Norman's emphasis on clear interaction to the constraints and opportunities of smaller screens or different contexts. The iPhone's success definitely pushed that forward. Modern accessibility and ethical design also have clear roots here. They stem directly from that early ergonomic focus and the fundamental shift towards prioritizing human needs over machine limitations. Designing for all abilities, inclusive design, is just the logical extension of designing machines to fit humans. Things like proper information hierarchy, clear text, good contrast, alt text for images, they benefit everyone, not just users with disabilities. It's about making things fundamentally more usable. And ethical design pushes further, thinking about fairness, transparency, inclusivity, privacy, user well-being. It means consciously avoiding manipulative dark patterns. It's about being honest about data, providing clear information, listening to users, and using those powerful behavioral economics insights ethically, not exploitatively. It even echoes back to Ram's thinking about the wider societal and environmental impact of design.
Okay, so bringing it all together, why should you, listening right now, if you're designing an app or a website or anything really, why should you care about feng shui or Greek chairs or WWII pilot errors?
Well, first, this history is just a massive source of inspiration. Seeing how people solved problems in the past, understanding the cultural context, it can spark genuinely new ideas for today. Second, it helps you avoid repeating mistakes. Dreyfus's point of friction is just as relevant when a user gets lost in your app navigation as it was for a physical product. Understanding past failures helps prevent future ones. It also gives you a sense of cultural relevance, connecting your work to a much bigger picture. And it ties you into this long tradition of focusing on human needs, aiming for lasting solutions like Rams talked about. Ultimately, knowing this history gives you a really valuable, critical perspective on your own work. It constantly reminds you that great UX isn't just about aesthetics, it's fundamentally about usability, accessibility, solving real human problems. Honestly, understanding this history is kind of a shortcut. It helps bridge the gap between your intuition as a designer and what users actually need to have a good, effective, maybe even delightful experience.
So quite a journey from ancient ideas about harmony and comfort through the industrial focus on efficiency, the digital revolution of HCI, layering in psychology, right up to today. And the constant theme, the connecting thread through it all, has really been that focus on the human using the thing.
It has, and thinking about how consistently the past informs the present, and how those fundamental human needs for clarity, comfort, efficiency, maybe even beauty seem to remain unchanged, it leads to a pretty interesting thought. Consider this. How will those same enduring human needs continue to dictate the design of technologies we can't even imagine yet?
Wow, that really is something to chew on, isn't it? A lot to think about. Well, on that note, if you found this exploration of UX history useful or informative, please do give it a like. It really helps us out. And to make sure you catch our future conversations and explorations here on the UXcast podcast, please hit that subscribe button for the Masked Designer channel. And finally, if you know anyone else who might find value in understanding where UX design comes from, maybe a colleague, a student, or just someone curious, please feel free to share this with them. Thank you so much for tuning in to Learning UX with Dialogue from Masked Designer.
Keep exploring, keep learning. We'll see you next time.